Hello everybody, God's a Pirate here, and welcome back to another famous commentary of mine. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about old and new games and to kind of discuss about the similarities and differences between them, because as some of you probably know, I play a vast variety of different sorts of games, both old and new, and I kind of wanted to discuss how things have kind of changed since the 90s, when gaming was huge and popular and you had your big games like Doom and Quake, and basically how they've translated today, where the market is mostly dominated by Call of Duty and Battlefield. And what made me think about this today is I went and picked up Need for Speed Most Wanted, the new one by Criterion Games for the PS3 today, because when I was little I played the original Need for Speed Most Wanted on the PlayStation 2, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, it had an awesome story, awesome racing mechanics, awesome everything to me. It was my perfect racing game. And when I heard they were remaking it, I thought, hey, this might be awesome. So I picked it up, and it was pretty good. I haven't played an awful lot of it, but from what I've been playing, it's been decent. I mean, it's got a huge variety of cars, it's got very pretty visuals, but it felt very different to what I remembered the original Need for Speed Most Wanted being. For one thing, the soundtrack wasn't as awesome as it used to be. I mean, in the old game you had these awesome rock tunes and metal tunes like Disturbed, Avenged Sevenfold, Mastodon, and all these other bands, and this time they've kind of replaced it with your techno, your dubstep like Skrillex and all that, which makes sense, bringing it back into today's standards and what's popular today, but it felt like a very different game. I mean, compared to the original Need for Speed Most Wanted, and I think that it's a good way of showing how games today have really changed. I mean, if you go and look at the first-person shooter genre of today, it's mostly your cover-based military shooters. Since Call of Duty started up a while ago, you have your big epic campaigns with pretty graphics, and there's a lot of picking over cover and taking pot shots, and all about being very strategic, it seems, particularly with Medal of Honor Warfighter, as some of you might have noticed. It's all about playing tactically with your friends. It's very, very different to what things used to be back in the 90s, with the Quake games and all that, where it was just a case of be the one person to kill everybody with a big rocket launcher. It's just simple deathmatch, and while that's present today, it still focuses on that cover-based system. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but the main differences are in single player, where with Quake and Serious Sam and games like Painkiller, which is still relatively new, mind you, it's all about guns, gore, and often heavy metal music as well. Yes, that's why games are often blamed for turning kids into serial killers, and why metal is also associated with that. But back on topic, the games are just about, you've got these big guns, a huge amount of enemies between you and the exit, and you're just kind of going through that. And it wasn't necessarily linear either. I mean, your levels were all filled with secrets and multiple ways of going about them, whereas these days they tend to be very linear and very short too. I mean, these days you're lucky to get more than 6 hours out of a first-person shooter campaign for any main game, unless it's a heavily story-based driven game. I mean, I think Dishonored has a fairly long campaign, but I haven't tried that yet. But then games like Bioshock as well have long campaigns for a first-person shooter. Mind you, it's also an RPG, so that could add to it. But things like the big titles like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and particularly Medal of Honor Warfighter, which I hear has a 3-hour long campaign, it's very different to older games, which you could easily spend about 20 hours in the campaign going through. I mean, look at Metroid Prime, the Metroid Prime trilogy. Most of those games, I spent about 20 hours each in those. So, and again, there was a lot of exploring in that. It wasn't linear. And as I said, I've always also pointed out with the racing games, they haven't changed an awful lot, really. I mean, if you look at the Gran Turismo series, it's hasn't changed much since the new one. Every game seems to be a bit of a patch up with the bringing it back up to date and all that. But these days we also seem to be getting a lot more HD re-releases of games, and I think this is the best way of getting the older games out to a younger generation, keeping the game's lifespan a lot longer. I mean, if you look at something like Shadow of the Colossus, one of the best games on the PS2, it got re-released in HD on the PlayStation 3, which is fantastic because that game ran at about 20 frames per second on the PlayStation 2, if I remember correctly, but thanks to the marvels of today's technology, we get to see it again on the newer consoles with a much better frame rate, and you would not believe how much I love that. It's a shame that they haven't done that with Time Splitters 2, the Time Splitters trilogy, because that was another example of a good story-based first-person shooter which was challenging, not necessarily linear. Actually, no, Time Splitters 3 was linear, mind you, but it had these really awesome multiplayer modes and was just an awful lot of fun, and didn't take itself too seriously like a lot of today's games. But you know, I guess what people want changes over time, and I'm quite curious to see where gaming goes from now. So. Anyway, that's enough from me today. If you have any opinions on what I've spoke about in this video, leave them down in the comments below. If you have any topics you'd like me to talk about, leave them down in the comments below. Or even better, go to my Facebook page and leave them as a suggestion there. Leave this video a like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you all later. Bye.